Welcome to chapter 67 of the Strength Culture Presents Quantum Lifting podcast, where today we have Luke Tulloch with us all the way from Sweden. Do you want to just give us a quick introduction, Luke, on yourself and what you do and your background?
Sure. So I've been a personal trainer for 13 years and studied a bit of neuroscience, but don't really use that too much. But really just mostly do a bit of education. I still coach people online at the moment, but stuck in Sweden, which is hardly the worst place to be stuck given what's going on. And I mean, that's pretty much it, man. That's me in a nutshell, I suppose.
Yeah, nice. I wanted to touch on that because Sweden have taken a little bit of a different approach, haven't they, to the rest of the world with their lockdown or their strategy. What have they? They've gone for the herd immunity, sort of. So everything's just sort of running normally over there.
Yeah, I think from what I've read online, a lot of people are kind of misinterpreting what they're trying to do in Sweden.
Yeah.
Their whole goal is still to flatten the curve, just like everybody else. But since the Swedes are more inclined to follow the instructions from the government and tend to stay away from each other a bit more, they were like, look, we're going to go with as minimal restriction of the people as we can, while still trying to keep the curve as flat as we can. And that's worked so far. But you see that we have quite a lot of deaths here compared to some of the other countries. And unfortunately, that's because they were a little bit lax with letting healthcare workers go into old folks' homes. And so they had people who were caring for old folks who were, working between like 6 or 7 different locations. And they weren't stringent enough with the rules. And so it's like a vast majority of the people who have died have been older people, obviously, who are a bit more susceptible to it. So that's not been good. But the rest of it has actually worked really well. And it's meant that we've been very unrestricted, relatively speaking. So, from my perspective, I think it's been quite a good approach. But I don't know that it would have worked in other countries, to be honest, just because it's a cultural thing where, you tell the Aussies to stay at home and everybody crowds Bondi.
Yeah.
Whereas
exactly.
if you tell the Swedes to stay at home, they go, yeah, okay, well, the government probably knows what they're doing, so we'll do that.
Yeah, we had obviously the restrictions lifted this week, first time, last weekend, and pretty much everybody was out at it was only 5 people, but pretty much everyone was at a social gathering of some sort. Exactly. It was just at a friend's house. So it's like, we're very much, you give us an inch and we take a mile. So I was going to ask, the Swedish culture, they're very compliant, they'll listen to rules and regulations and not really push the boundaries too much.
They will, but I think the thing about them is that they trust that they've elected someone who knows what they're doing. Like the guy who's the face of all of this, his name is Anders Tegnell, and he's super bright. He's like a world-renowned epidemiologist. They're like, right, he's in charge of the health ministry. He's making the decisions because he's the expert. The government goes, right, he's the expert. This is what we elected him for. Okay, let's listen to what he has to say. Whereas in Australia, our government, we all consider them a bunch of Muppets, basically. So, I think there's a massive cultural difference in that. And I can't say I blame the way Aussies or the Americans think. It's like a lot of the people that are in power aren't necessarily qualified for the role, but it seems like the way it's set up here is that, the bloke who's kind of given all the advice seems to know what he's doing. And so it's like, well, yeah, let's listen to him. I'm not an epidemiologist. He is. He's looking at the data every day. Fuck, I'll follow what he says.
Is the Bill Gates 5G, what's it called, conspiracy as rife over there as it is here?
I actually don't know. I'm still exposed to a lot of Aussie and US and UK media online and stuff. So I'm sure there's people out there that are into that whole thing, but I haven't heard too much of it from Swedes themselves. So yeah.
And the other thing I wouldn't mind knowing about Sweden is what the hell is going on with their lolly shops, mate?
They're off the hook. If there's, Sweden is viewed as some kind of paradise by many because of their social democracy. But let me tell you, the secret are these lolly shops. They are fucking off the hook. They are insane.
One of your stories where there was 2 side by side and there was enough lollies in both the shops to feed a fucking country. How do they both support a lifestyle?
I couldn't. So this is in a town called Lund, which is like maybe an hour away from us. It's a university town in the south of Sweden. And we went there, and I'd heard that there was a nice lolly shop there, right? So I go, and it's huge. It's massive. It's like more than you could ever imagine. And there's another one next door, and somehow they're able to stay in business. I think it's because they're across the road from a movie theater that they're like, but I couldn't believe it. It's honestly, yeah, it blows your mind. And it's not just the amount, it's the quality of it is unreal. I've never tasted anything like it. So it's not good for my blood glucose, but what can you do?
Enjoy. Yeah, I've got to look these lolly stalls up. I've got no idea. I'm a little bit off the grid when it comes to Instagram, so I don't see all your stories all the time. But I'll have to give it a look up after this.
Yeah, mate. It'll blow your mind.
It's incredibly impressive, the selection of lollies that they have in one store.
I'm picturing, speaking of Harry Potter, because you were listening to this, in Harry Potter 6, the movie where they go into that, Ron's brothers make the lolly store. I'm picturing like this over the top.
Feels a bit like that.
We don't really have lolly. We used to have sugar at Chatston, but that's gone.
It's like how if you used to go into Target or Kmart and stuff, and they had like the Allen's Pick and Mix kind of thing. It's like that, but imagine
on steroids.
Something,
a whole supermarket worth of.
Yeah, it is. It's like the floor space of the gym over there, except lollies. It's like ridiculous.
That's crazy. Well, I guess we'll go on to how you ended up in Sweden. So we're going to talk a little bit about obviously creating like an online business or remote work for yourself where you can pretty much just get up and leave and work anywhere in the world. But how did you end up in Sweden? Was that always the plan? Because you were not long ago situated in Sydney at Lift Performance Centre, but we'll get to Lift a little bit later because
cool.
Obviously shut down. But how did you end up in Sweden, and how did you go about sort of moving the business online? And
it was a slow process. So like I have a few different arms of my business. So I've got a membership site that's kind of lower cost. I've got more expensive courses where that's like where my main content is. I've got online coaching, and then I was coaching people in person as well. So there was a variety of things that I was doing when I was at Lyft, and it was just this slow transition. I think a lot of coaches, when they first go online, they go to a hybrid model. So they'll do, and that was my cheaper option. It's like you can't afford to train in person with me, or if we don't have any times available, okay, the next thing you could do is do online coaching. And so that got me a base of clients. It wasn't that many, but it was a few. And then you can kind of continue to build on that. It just got to the point where I was doing less and less sessions face-to-face in the gym. And the sessions I was doing, I was enjoying, which is why I kept doing them. And then the idea was, hey, I'm actually earning enough now that we can go and travel, my wife and I. My wife is Swedish, which is why we've ended up being in Sweden. But the idea was originally to just do some seminars on the road where we could, and just to move around Europe and see what it's like. Just take the opportunity, because we're in this point of our lives where we don't have kids yet. We've got zero debt. And it's just that golden, period of maybe a couple of years before we're looking at buying a house, starting a family, all that sort of stuff. So it's just like, man, we have to do this now. Since she's from the EU, we can kind of go anywhere within the EU and just chill there as long as we want. So to me, that was very appealing. And I was like, I'll kick myself if we don't take advantage of this opportunity. And so we started, then I did a seminar in Stockholm, which was very successful. It was awesome. And then, had the virus happen. And so we're like, okay, I'm going to cancel my UK and Portugal plans. We had that all sort of booked and ready to go, but just thought, look, borders are probably going to close. It's probably not going to be too good. So we just are chilling in Sweden now. But it was just this slow build up with the online stuff, to the point where I was suddenly going like, hey, actually, I'm earning enough now that we could sustain ourselves indefinitely being on the road, which was pretty cool.
Yeah, we often talk about the online component of the business, because ours has definitely drifted quite a fair way that way as well, where there's obviously less overheads. You've got a bigger market as well because you're not limited to just the city you're in. So like someone like yourself, you're in Sweden, but I'm sure you're obviously working with people all around the world.
Yeah, all over, yeah.
So it creates that market for you because Jamie and I have discussed this quite a bit where people think the end goal right now in the fitness industry is to own a gym. But obviously with having a gym comes a lot of potential expenses. And as we saw with obviously Lift, like it might not even be there. So there is definitely a like growing capacity for online business that we're moving into and like definitely want to push. And I actually enjoy it a little bit more as a coach because I find that people who train online, they're a bit more intrinsically driven and want to actually get better. Have you found that with potentially online versus in-person training?
Yeah, mostly. I think the process by which I have people apply for or inquire requires them to fill out a fairly sort of super long form. But the whole process means that it weeds out people who are tire kickers to a great extent. And then the pricing, I used to be very expensive when I was online because it wasn't my main focus. And frankly, I just had the demand. I could charge, $130 a week for online coaching, which is outrageous, to be honest with you, but people were willing to pay it. So I was like, well, fine. But that's more than they're paying for in-person sessions. So it's just like, it didn't make sense to me, but they were willing to pay it. But I reduced that because I felt like I didn't want to limit my services to only people who were very well off, essentially, and able to put in that amount of money. So I did reduce it a bit, but it's still a fairly expensive thing. It's not a trivial cost for most people. And so I think that whole process means that by the time you end up with a nice client base, you've got people who are pretty into it and they're willing to follow what you want to do and they're bought in and that sort of thing, which is really nice. You don't always get that with in-person training, especially if you're, the average personal trainer is not going to be turning away business that comes to them. You know what I mean? That's the reality of it. So I do like that. I think that the online coaching suits someone like me very well because I'm a bit more of a like cerebral academic kind of person. But I'll give you a stark contrast with my wife. Like she does calisthenic training and mobility work and that kind of stuff as her main focus. And she finds it more challenging to have an online business with that kind of thing. And she's the type of coach where people go to her because she's very good at interacting with them. Basically, she's one of those coaches who's unbelievable hands-on. She's unbelievable interacting with people in a face-to-face setting. I wouldn't say those are my strengths, but those are definitely her strengths. And so for her to go online is a lot harder, and she actually doesn't like it as much. Whereas I'm kind of the opposite. I prefer coaching people online. Not that I don't like coaching them in person, but I just prefer it online because it suits my personality a bit better. So it's interesting. I think like there's pros and cons to both. Obviously, you can be more hands-on in person. Often you can get a bit of a better session out, but at the same time, being online means that I can coach people who would never have access to my skills otherwise. And it means I can be a little bit more focused on the data that they're giving me, which is cool as well.
Yeah, nice. I was going to ask, obviously you do have quite a few like education, you run your courses and your membership service online. Will you always continue to coach and be a personal trainer, or do you see yourself more heading down sort of the education route?
I like having the variety. Yeah, yep. I am a little bit more of an academic kind of person. But I like having the variety, to be honest with you. I think that's what I enjoyed about my sort of hybrid setup at Lift is that, I had some in person, but not so much that I was like burnt out on it. And then I had some online, but not so much that all I'm doing all day is sitting at the computer looking at spreadsheets of people's, tracking sheets. So I do like the variety of it all. If I'm really honest, the thing that gets me going the most is the more academic side of things and looking into research and making that content. That's definitely what fires me up the most. But at the same time, I think that there's a point where you have to apply that stuff as well. And you have to, be the person on the ground. If I'm teaching coaches stuff, I've got to be able to say, well, yeah, okay, this is what the research says. This is what I've tried with clients, and this is kind of where I've landed with it. I think that's really helpful as well. And at the end of the day, I want the information that we're learning to actually be usable and to help people. I don't want it to just be out there and be like, well, this is what it says. Cool. Like, it's how can we make people better with that information? Yeah, exactly. How can we make people better? You know, that's really the end goal for it. So I think I'll always coach people, you know, but I do think that having the variety for me is pretty important to stay in it. I think that's probably true for most people. I don't know what you guys think. You guys do a lot of stuff across various domains as well. You must find that as well.
Yeah, I personally do enjoy it. I like, obviously when the gym is open, you know, we do 15 hours coaching on the floor. We run a semi-private. Jamie's going less and less with his coaching. He's going more down the mentorship side of things. But yeah, I like the variety in it. You know, we're running our podcast. We've got the mentorship going. We do a bit of presenting. We do a bit of online, like a fair few online clients. And I like that spread, because I know I hear some personal trainers are just like 50 hours a week, you know, 10 clients a day, one-on-one. And I just don't think I'd be doing this job if I had to do that. And I don't.
No, exactly.
As well. Cause he used to.
Yeah. I'm in the same space where it's like, I like coaching because it allows me to apply and strengthen our systems and build out that sort of stuff. But my flame is definitely moving in the direction of mentoring, education, and all that sort of stuff, and presenting. That's definitely what inspires me a little bit more, and where we've sort of, you said you were a PT for 13 years. This would be my, I think, 9th year coming into this year. So starting that transition now, and it'll be interesting to see where the gym is at its 13th year. It'll be cool to sort of see where we're actually at with so many options and opportunities in front of us. It is cool, and you're definitely somebody that we see as sort of trailblazing that education space way. So it's cool. It's been cool to see you grow. I remember when you came here to present with Jordan Shallow at the Systems in Synergy, and we sat in the at the lunch break, and I'm like, oh, so how did you become, like, I asked, like, oh, was it just like obviously it's never going to just be like a random event that creates this thing that just goes off, but like, what were some of the key steps that allowed you to sort of build your name and then to really accelerate in the way you did in the last sort of 2 years? But do you want to just quickly touch on some of that as well? I remember you speaking about like your Q&As of the Instagram, and you had a very interactive following early on that sort of drove it.
Yeah, absolutely. I think that helped a lot, but I've always been someone who wanted to kind of put ideas out there and have people, you know, jump in on the mix of that. And a lot of that is, you know, people kind of see this education piece as like, well, this is the guy telling you what the information is. But really, I see it as a collaboration and in iterating ideas and that kind of stuff. And I've always tried to do that. So when I first started at Fitness First, you know, I used to do it in small groups with the trainers there, because it was just like, oh, Luke probably knows about this because he's obsessed with reading this research or whatever. And so we started doing that. And I think I've always had that kind of attitude with things. I've always wanted to share stuff and get people's ideas on things. And so I took that onto Instagram. I resisted social media for a long time, but then I slowly realized, like, hey, actually this is probably worth doing. And yeah, it was the Q&As. It was replying to everybody. It's giving people, you know, time of day and being open to what they have to say as well. Those were really important for me. And slowly but surely, people started to notice that. And, you know, I got a few shout outs from people who have really big followings as well. And that really helped. You know, I had interactions with a few sort of people that you would consider industry leaders that I've interacted with and I've spoken to. And, you know, all of that stuff kind of adds up and builds momentum over time. And it took many years, but in the background, I was kind of developing all of this education stuff. And I just didn't really I didn't really know how to launch it. I didn't know how to get it out there to people. And I sat on it for like 2 or 3 years, all of these lectures that I'd written. I just didn't know how to get it out there. And eventually I was like, fuck, I just got to do this. Hey, so threw it out there, put a cheap price on it. A bunch of people signed up magically. They said it was great. I was like, oh, sweet. I got some testimonials now. And like, that's kind of how it took off, and that's where it went. So yeah, man, it's funny because, you know, people always say it's a slow, you know, it's the 10 years that create the overnight success, which is very true. But at the same time, I think it's just stealing like momentum and stealing, you know, inches where you can. That ends up, you know, everything's constantly evolving. Like right now, I've got a million ideas right now I get so many business ideas or ways that I want to change the way I'm doing things that I actually have to slow down and be like, hey, like the current iteration of what you're doing has only been live for 6 months. You need to fucking just chill and stop chopping and changing stuff, because I get excited about all these new ideas of trying to deliver information and different things that we can try and all this sort of stuff. So yeah, it's a bit funny like that, but it is just, I don't know, it's getting out there and trying it.
It's funny you should say that, because I remember I reached out to you at the start of the year because we wanted to get you at the Congress for this year and potentially try and then COVID's happened and then all this other shit. And I don't even know what's going to happen now. That still is open, and potentially we may move it into an online version, similar to what the JPS guys and stuff. So I still may be reaching out with that. But we had Durham McGuinness, who owns a strength and conditioning facility around the corner from us, Core Advantage, and an incredible career in strength and conditioning, pure strength and conditioning, athletic development, and then moved into the private sector and has built a very successful sound gym here. And he said that concept of like, the current iteration of our internship, he used it in the context of his internship. He's like, they built their first one and they got to the end of it and they're like, nah, fuck this one. And he scrunches it up, throws it in the bin, builds another one. He said he got to the 7th iteration before he was like, all right, I think we're onto something here that could stick around. So
it's very familiar.
Funny, that.
It's very familiar. Yeah. I'm constantly thinking of different ways of doing stuff. So yeah, it's one of those things, because I mean, the other thing that I find frustrating with a lot of coaches, if we're talking education, is that they don't give enough time for themselves to develop. You know, like where you're at the moment, you can get very excited and motivated to make changes to how you're running your business, or, you know, whether you're trying to generate leads, go online, upskill yourself, all that stuff. And that is very good to be excited about that and to have lots of ideas and to be creative. But at the same time, you have to also understand that you're not going to go from, you know, becoming a coach and then being able to charge $130 an hour within like a year or two. It takes you 10 years to start to be like, okay, you know, like I think I've been in the industry for a long time, but like I'm 32 this year. You know what I mean? Like I'm going to be doing this for the rest of my life. Like where am I going to be when I'm 40 or 50 or 60? You know what I mean? Like there's so much more career development that's going to occur. And so sometimes I have to think to myself, hey man, like you're moving in the right direction. Like be patient with it, be consistent, and it'll get where you need to go. So it's weird trying to balance those two.
Yeah, it's
definitely. I was gonna say I've definitely felt that myself. I've only been 5-6 years in the industry, and a few weeks ago, typical COVID sort of lockdown, just spending a lot of time on my own, had a bit of a breakdown. I was like, oh my God, is this job even feat? Like, can I do this forever? Blah, blah, blah. And I was like, am I even going anywhere? But then I realized, like speaking to Jamie Buziotis, our other coach, that a lot of guys that we do look up to in the industry have been doing it for 20, 25 years. They're in their 40s, and it is just a slow burn. Just be patient. You've been doing this for 5 years. Just relax and keep making this, you know, putting the steps in to get to the next step. And then it'll accumulate over time. Yeah, man. Because I definitely look at you as sort of someone that in the next 5 years, I would like to be, you know, you're presenting alongside Jordan Shallow and stuff like that. And they're sort of aspirations I would like to do. And so I definitely look up to you. And then I'm sure you have your guys that look up to, you know, 10 years ahead of you, and we've just got to play the game.
Yeah, man. Like it's the same as any other career. I try and look at it as any other career. If you want to be a partner in a law firm, it's not reasonable to be like, yeah, man, 35, I'm going to be doing that. Like, fuck, you're probably going to be in your 50s by the time that happens. You know what I mean?
30 years of practicing law. Yeah.
Yeah. You just got to like get better that whole time and develop yourself that whole time. It's like any other career.
Mm. Yeah. The other big thing, I know you made a post about it this week, and you've sort of alluded to it, but it's definitely something that I see in young coaches sort of missing that step of just application for a long period. But you made the post this week about learning, and like different strategies for learning and all that sort of stuff, and maybe some things that people go potentially wrong with, or ways that they could improve that. What sort of strategies have you found, or would you recommend to young coaches or whoever who have maybe found some holes in their current systems and are looking to plug that with new strategies or new lessons or whatever they can do to improve that?
Yeah, I mean, I think the first thing, honestly, is the attitude to learning, because unfortunately in this industry, I think a lot of people, and this is not everybody, and I think it is changing, but a lot of people get into this industry because they're not particularly academic and they don't like a classroom. You know, it's mostly people who are like, fuck, I don't want to go to uni, or I didn't like this was actually my situation. Although I am academic, the way my career panned out was I did a year, I didn't know what I wanted to do at uni. I went and did a business degree. I did the first year of it and I fucking hated it. And I was like, what am I going to do in the meantime? I like training in the gym, so I'm going to go be a PT. And then
exactly
that
what
stuck.
That's
I mean, it's such a common story, man.
That's
Yes,
actually, Charlie did the
mate.
same thing, but you did 2.5 years, didn't you, Charlie?
Nah, I did a year and a half of marketing, commerce marketing at Swinburne. And then I took a year off, and then you got into personal training, and then I followed you along, and But
I mean,
to be honest, I never planned to be a personal trainer long time. I always wanted to be a high school teacher. That was my
cool.
So I ended up staying with it, and now we're here.
Yeah, man. But I mean, I think that's such a common story. So when you have trainers then and you're trying to teach them stuff and you're like, remember back to high school chemistry, because you kind of got to know that to understand like muscles and things like that. You got to have this basic scientific knowledge, and then they just check out straight away, right? They just go, fuck no, that's hard. I don't understand it. I'm done. I'm out of here. And for me, that's the first stumbling block when you're trying to learn, is that you need to have the right attitude towards it. And you need to understand that just because something is difficult and you don't understand it, doesn't mean you should check out. It doesn't mean you're never going to get it. That's actually when you learn the most. So I made a distinction between learning and performance. And in the literature, the distinction is performance is being able to quite literally show off a short-term change in your skill or knowledge. So for example, what they often use in the literature is they'll give people a list of words and they go, right, you got the next 45 minutes to memorize this list of words. So performance would be, I don't know any of these words beforehand. I've now memorized 20 and I can recite 20 words back to you at the end of the testing period. Cool. But learning is different. Learning is when you come back a week later and they go, how many of those 20 words do you remember? And you go, well, I got all 20 out of 20 last time. I could perform, but now I haven't learned them. I only know one of those words. And sometimes what happens is you can learn without improving your performance. So some people in those studies will come in and they'll spend their 45 minutes trying to memorize that list of 20 words, and they'll only be able to recall 12 of them on the spot. So their performance is worse than the people who could recall all 20 of those words. But when we come back a week later, a lot of those people can recall more words than the guys who could perform with all 20. So the guys who perform with all 20 come back and they can only tell you 2 of those words. The guys who could only do 12 words on the day come back, but hey, they've hung on to more words. They can recall 8 of those words. And so you can have learning in absence of performance improvements. And so that means that when you're sitting in front of some material and you're struggling with it and you're going, man, I'm never going to get this. Every single time I look at this shit and I try and remember it, I just don't remember it. That's actually when you can get some of your most robust learning, long-term learning occurring. And that's a very counterintuitive thing for a lot of us. And it's very difficult. Like I'm experiencing it at the moment because I'm trying to learn Swedish. And sometimes there's words that I've looked up the meaning for 12 times. And still sometimes I hear it and I'm like, fucking, what does that mean again? What does that mean again? And you look it up again. You're like, I'm never going to get this. But it's when you're struggling with it and you're actually physically forming neural connections that you're really getting a long-term change. And that's what we want. So learning is being able to do 2 things. It's being able to firstly have some kind of long-term recall. But I think the other thing is being able to apply that into various contexts. So if we have that in mind, then it kind of means that we can have this attitude towards learning where when you're struggling with something, when it's difficult, when you're not quite getting it the first time around, that that's really when you're having the subconscious learning process occurring. So that's kind of the first thing, I guess. There's tons of like little things you can do with learning practice. But I think the first step is always understanding that when you're struggling, just like when we're in the gym trying to lift a weight, that's really where the magic happens. You don't grow muscle by doing easy sets. You grow muscle by doing the grinders, by pushing yourself hard. Sometimes you're like, fuck, I don't even know if I can do this. Same thing is with learning, because you're trying to physically grow a structure in your head.
It's definitely the part about applying it as well. That's definitely something that I have always turned back to when trying to learn, particularly like processes or systems. I think about like assessment processes is something that I really like to dive into and all that sort of stuff. But it's not until you actually start to, all right, well, I'm going to try this on 15 different people. I'm going to get my whole client list for a Tuesday or a Wednesday and go through the process and actually apply what I've learned. And yeah, you might fuck it up a handful of times, but it's through that process of actually applying it, working out how it's going to fit within your systems and doing all that. That's definitely something that I have found to be of most beneficial for me, and something that I think definitely resonate with for sure.
Yeah. It's part of it is like variability in how you're approaching the information. So, the language learning example is doing listening, reading, writing, and speaking. So it's all similar content, but you're using it in different ways, right? And that's the same with any information we learn. So if you're learning some kind of system or whatever, it's like the way that you sort of go about feeling out where it fits that actually helps you to learn as well. In the literature, that's termed variability of practice. It applies for both physical skills and it applies for like verbal or cognitive stuff that you're trying to learn. So like the classic experiments are trying to improve people's free throws in basketball. And some of the ways that they did this in the research is that they would have people stand at the free throw line and take, I think it was 120 shots from the free throw line. And then they had another group where they only let them take like 30 shots from the free throw line. And they took the rest of their 120 shots from different areas around the court. And as they came back for the testing day, they found that actually the guys who shot from all around the court, even though they had less actual practice at shooting free throws, ended up having better execution of free throws. And they got more overall free throws than the guys who only did free throws. So the idea there is that the more information you can give your brain, or the more ways you can try and apply information, you're kind of feeling out all the different nooks and crannies on where that information fits, and you're giving your brain more data to use with. And that actually results in better learning and better execution of the skill later on, better recall, all that kind of stuff. So I think there's definitely something to that. And I've certainly found with what I do in terms of teaching stuff, that's helped a lot with my retention, because firstly, I'm reading and synthesizing the information from textbooks and studies. Then I'm writing lectures out of it. Then I'm physically teaching it. And then I'm answering questions about it. Like there's all these different aspects to using that information where I get multiple exposures and I get exposures in different ways as well.
Yeah. Oh, you go.
I was just saying, I can definitely relate to that. It was not long ago. I remember I went on Weekly Weights podcast to talk about auto-regulation, because it's something we use quite a lot here. And before I was nervous, I was saying to Jamie, I'm nervous. I don't know. I knew the information was in there. I'm like, but I was just worried about and since then we've presented on it. I've presented on that topic multiple times, done the weeks, the modules in the coaching mentorship as well. And just relaying the information so many times, I feel like I've learned it. Like it's there ready to be recalled at any point. But I guess it's having those exposures and trying to find those exposures so often with a topic. And like, how would you go about, like, is it just having conversations with people, or is that what you use your Instagram for, to like practice talking about topics and that kind of stuff?
Yeah, partly, man. Partly. Yeah. I think it's all of that stuff. The other thing I think that possibly people misunderstand about learning is like what they call massed practice versus distributed practice. And we can liken this to studying for an exam. So like most people, in my experience, when they study for exams, they spend like the week before just cramming the shit out of all the stuff they should have been learning throughout the semester, right?
Yeah.
And that's how most people try and study, or most people try and learn. They go, and I find this with trainers too. They go, right, well, I've got my Sunday Arvos free, so I'm going to sit down and I'm going to spend 4 hours, watching these lectures or YouTube videos or podcasts or whatever. Now, in the short term, it's like if you had a test the next day and you didn't know the material, like, okay, cool, I would cram. Like, that's how I would do it.
Yeah, for sure.
But ideally, what you want is distributed practice, meaning you see the material for a brief period. Maybe you spend 20 minutes on it, and then 3 days later, you look at it again. And then 3 days later, you look at it again. And in fact, doing that let's say, so now over the week, you've got, you've had 3 exposures of 20 minutes. So you've got an hour of exposure to the material. That actually results in better learning and better recall in the long term than spending 1 hour in one afternoon sitting and reading it. And so I think, to your point, it's about having multiple exposures to the material through a variety of channels. Okay, so you have your study maybe, and then maybe you write a summary of it, and then maybe you have a conversation to a mate about it, or a study group, and then maybe you make a YouTube video on it. Whether or not you publish that video or not, you could do exactly what I do. You can make lectures on it, and you can give pretend presentations on it. You don't even have to do it to anybody, but that's going to help you learn because you're getting multiple exposures to the material and you're doing it in a variety of different ways. So yeah, I think that's really where, and I've certainly found as well, exactly like you said, the topics that I know the most about are the ones that I've had to present multiple times, or I've spoken about on multiple podcasts, that kind of thing, for sure.
Yeah, without a doubt.
Nice.
You spoke about it before, but like that sort of like you're rewiring your brain. Because I know Charlie read a book recently, The Brain That Changes Itself. I think what it was called, Charlie?
Yeah, it's called The Brain That Changes Itself. Ben Pekulski recommendation. And I listened to the audio version. One of the best books I've listened to, just fascinating. I'm really interested in all that the neural networks and how they all work and stuff, but just, it also was very applicable to just life. I found it, like, especially with me learning the guitar, the more you repeat and run those circuits, the stronger and more efficient they're going to get. So it really just comes down to practice, but perfect practice. But I interrupted you there, Jamie.
Yeah, no, that's right.
That's the book. That's the book.
That gives you the context anyway. Because I was going to say, because you just spoke about like you're literally wiring your brain to learn this sort of stuff. How does sleep affect that? Because my understanding is that during our sleep cycles is where that it almost gets like cemented into our wiring, for lack of a better term.
Yeah.
I'm assuming you know something about sleep and how it would fit into the process of learning and motor skill development, and probably cognitive skill development as well. But yeah.
Yeah. Well, so, I mean, it actually fits really nicely as an analogy to training with weights. So when we train is not when we make the structural changes that cause us to get better and to get stronger or to get bigger or whatever. The training is the stimulus. And in the same way, when we're exposed to information, in whatever format that is, that's the stimulus. But then the body's got to go away and make some structural changes so that we can realize the improvements from that stimulus. So just like when we train with weights, you're not going to be immediately stronger. It's going to take you a few days for your body to recover and to have our supercompensation occur. In the same way, when we're away from our learning material is actually when the structural changes happen in the brain. We have quite literally different connections being made through the neurons, and there's a very specific pathway that fires and lights up when you remember something or when you're using a particular type of information. And so what's happening is those neural networks are being built. They're quite physically changing in your brain. And that mostly happens during sleep. And that's why sleep is so important. So you're consolidating memories when you sleep. You are strengthening the neural structures that you've stimulated. So to give you an example, if you are trying to memorize a piece of information or learn a piece of information, what will happen if we were to look into your head and see the electrical activity in your brain, there'd be a really particular pathway, different neurons connecting to each other and firing in a certain pattern while you're learning that information. And what happens is, so that's happening while you're actually looking at it. When you go away and you go back to sleep, that same pathway is fired over and over and over and over again, and it strengthens those neural connections. And so the more often you can fire those neurons in that particular pattern, the more likely it is that that structure is going to stay intact and that you're going to have a long-lasting memory that you're able to easily recall. So there's this saying that neurons that fire together, wire together. And so what we're trying to do...
Freud.
Yeah, totally. And so what we're trying to do is, give the stimulus. And again, I can liken this to your training session. I mentioned before about studying for 4 hours is not as good as separating those sessions. In the same way, you wouldn't do every single training session that you had planned for the week on one day. It doesn't make any sense. You split them up over whatever it is, 4 sessions. 4 1-hour sessions a week is better than 1 4-hour session a week.
I think you used the brushing your teeth analogy at the Systems and Synergy. And you see, you don't brush your teeth for 2 hours a week. You brush them twice a day for 2 to 3 minutes. And that's where the benefit of brushing your teeth is, not for 2 hours once a week.
That's it. So that's also a great analogy. I love that one, because the brushing the teeth is a very short thing as well. It's not like a huge effort to do. It's just that you have to do it regularly. And the same thing applies with learning. And so the more often you do that, then the more frequently those neural networks are firing together. And then, during sleep is really where it all gets consolidated, and those structures are sort of more permanently entrenched into the mind. And so certainly one of the tips I can give you if you're trying to learn more stuff is to make sure that you're on top of your sleep, because it just means that all of the time you spend actually studying or trying to learn is much more effective. It just makes it, maybe 2-fold or 3-fold more effective than if you were, cutting your sleep a little bit short or something like that.
Listening to Matthew Walker, I know he said the saying to sleep on it, like if you have a problem, to sleep on it, that's where it comes from, because overnight your brain is literally problem solving to figure out that problem or that issue or that task that you were struggling with the day before.
Yeah, there's actually kind of 2 modes of what your brain is in that it tends to toggle between. So we have a more focused mode, and that's when you're really concentrating on something. And then we have what we call the diffuse mode. And so you can think about the focus mode as like a spotlight on the info that you want to learn. The diffuse mode, I used like the analogy of a flare gun, where you fire up a flare. The light is not as bright in that focused beam, but it lights up a bigger area. And so in that diffuse mode, what's happening is that your brain is basically taking all the information that you know, all the stuff that you've learned, and it's fitting it into all the other stuff you already know as well. And that's really what's happening when we're daydreaming, or when we're not focused on anything in particular, or when we're sleeping. Your brain's kind of just running all these simulations. It's lighting up different networks, and they might not be related, but that's actually where you get a lot of really creative ideas. So one of the things that I recommend is that people have a broad base of stuff that they learn from. Sometimes learning something that seems completely unrelated to the topic that you want to get better at will give you more ideas in that topic, or it'll have some kind of carryover that you don't recognize at first. And so, essentially that's what it is. It's when you sleep, you do get that sort of subconscious, reconciliation happening with the rest of your brain as well, when you've just focused on something else.
I guess I know you go, Jamie.
I was going to say, what do you learn? What are some of the things that you're interested in that may be outside the space of the typical Luke Tulloch material?
Just about anything, man. I think it's funny because you could think of the most random hobby or topic or something, and there'll be a community around that have dove so deep into it that you couldn't fathom, that I don't know, whatever, knitting or making wooden coasters is there's a real art to it, and there's someone who has spent 10 years fucking perfecting it. You know what I mean? Literally anything is like that. And so I find that fascinating. And so for me, I do a variety of things that are different to fitness. I used to be almost exclusively obsessed with fitness, but I enjoy things like technology. I read a little bit about economics and stuff like that. Philosophy is very interesting to me. I I love music and I play guitar. I'm trying to learn a language. I actually want to really get into woodworking. That's like one of my life goals, is to get better with my hands and woodworking and that sort of thing. And unfortunately, with what's going on at the moment, I can't really do that. But before we left, I actually looked into doing courses on that, or even going to TAFE and starting like carpentry or something like that.
Really?
So there's, yeah. There's tons of shit, man. And like when I read, I don't typically read nonfiction. I typically read fiction. I read fantasy and sci-fi. Which
I was going to ask
has a lot of interesting ideas and different ways of looking at the world in it as well. So there's I think anything has depth to it, and so you can learn from any of that stuff. It just has to kind of tickle your fancy, and you have to give it enough time and understand where the people that are into that thing are coming from. Coffee's one of them. I think coffee's fascinating, and really when you dive into it, it's just chemistry. It's applied chemistry, and so I find that fascinating. Like there's tons of stuff, man.
Yeah, I've got about 40 questions to ask after that spiel, but one of the ones I wanted to go to was the fiction, because I know I've discussed this with you before, but I had this misconception for a long time that if I was going to read, it had to be something nonfiction, I had to be learning, but I have recently dove back into the fiction world of reading, and I find it probably one of the most it's almost just like non-specific. It's like GPP. Like it's just reading itself is just it works my brain over. It just feels good. But I feel quite like I've gotten some active rest when I've done it. But even just because you're in a world that isn't the same as our world, it gets your like imagination working in a different way that I just don't really get with anything else. And so I definitely can relate to you on the reading fiction, because it's become something that I really enjoy. And I know Jamie's listening to Harry Potter at the moment. What's the benefit there? What do you feel like? Why have you enjoyed listening to Harry Potter recently?
I actually, because you said economics, I was listening, and I think I've only just realized this, but I think I was listening to an economic textbook, Thomas Sewell Basic Economics. It was the driest. Oh, cool. It's 26 hours long on Audible. I'm about 8 hours into my over 1 day experience of listening to that, but I enjoy economics too. Just learning different things about how the society of the world sort of rolls around and does its thing. But Harry Potter came into my work. I actually don't even know why I started, but I listened to the first book in about 2 days. I've just been like sitting in my car listening for an extra 30 minutes when I get home and all that sort of stuff. So even though I know the story, I've just thoroughly enjoyed diving back into a fantasy world of witches and wizards and Voldemort and stuff. So yeah. I don't know. I don't know what it is, but I've thoroughly enjoyed it. And I'm now in the Chamber of Secrets with the basilisk.
Oh, the basilisk.
Yeah, whatever. What's your favorite fiction? What's your favorite fiction book
or series?
Geez, I really like. There's a guy called Patrick Rothfuss who wrote a book called The Name of the Wind, and I think that's my next. Really good.
That's my next. After I finish the Gentleman Bastard series, I'm going.
Gentleman Bastards is very good. I really like that as well.
So I'm reading that. I'm on the first one.
Cool, man. Yeah. Like, there's a lot of really good ones. I have a special place in my heart for a book called Magician, which is by a guy called Raymond E. Feast. And that was like, I think my cousin gave me that book when I was pretty young. And that was like the first serious fantasy book I read. And I think that I still have a soft spot for that. I think it's really good. Yeah, man, but I totally, like, I agree exactly with what you said, where it just gets you in this different state of mind, and there's a different world, and even just like some of the language use or the different concepts that are explored in that, because you're listening to like a fantasy story or a sci-fi story, but a lot of those things explore different parts of being human and how the world works, you know what I mean? A lot of the sci-fi especially, it's like a lot of existential sort of stuff that goes into that. And so, you're kind of getting this education masked as a story, regardless, which is really cool.
Yeah, nice. Yeah, I think it's a very big misconception that if you're going to read, it has to be nonfiction and learning. And I think it's like we watch movies for enjoyment. Why not read for enjoyment? And I know my focus has gotten better when I am reading content that is related to our work. It is a lot more focused and better just from practicing reading more often.
Exactly, yeah. And on that, with the social media use and the scrolling and all that sort of stuff, you any behavior you engage in, you're physically changing the structure of your brain to better engage in that behavior. And so if you want more focus, but you spend a lot of time scrolling through shit,
unfocused,
you're programming your brain to get better at scanning stuff quickly and making a quick assessment and then moving on to something else, which can be an advantage if that's what you want. But if you want to be able to sit with something and focus on it for longer, then you need to do that instead. And so I agree with you that it makes, for me, creating content or reading textbooks or reading studies that much easier if I'm reading my fantasy and stuff in my spare time, because you just get better at focusing.
And would you, speaking of focusing, have you practice meditation?
I'm not very good at it, but I do. Yeah.
I think that's the whole point of it.
Yeah. Well, I found that, that has helped a lot with my focus. Especially in this lockdown period, I've pretty much been every day 10 minutes, and my ability to read has improved drastically. It's almost seeing that improvement. I'm like, want to keep doing it every day. So I was just wondering if you practice that yourself.
I'm a big fan of it, and I think the focus part of it is huge. And I I have to say, I'm much happier if something's happening now and I have to sit there and wait it out. Like it doesn't really bother me. It's I forgot my headphones at home and I can't listen to something. It's like, okay, that's fine. I don't really care, which is cool.
Yeah,
nice.
I know Sam Harris calls about it. It's like the antidote to boredom. You can never be bored again because you've got a sort of internal game to play with yourself, to shift focus and shift direction and all that sort of stuff. It is
senses.
it's interesting.
Yeah, definitely.
What's planned once all this stuff lifts off and you can get traveling again? I know we've discussed some potentially trying to live in certain areas or whatever, but what?
Yeah.
You said Portugal and the UK. Are they still on the cards at all? Can you do that?
I'd love to. So we were going to drive around Scotland and then go to Portugal, and we didn't have anything planned after that. We were just going to bum around there for a bit, I think, and do some seminars and stuff. And then I had some US seminars planned, all this sort of stuff. So, we don't know because we're not really sure exactly what's going to happen. And once all the restrictions are lifted, will there be a second wave of infections and all this kind of stuff? Who knows? But for now, I think we were thinking about staying in Sweden for a little bit, like maybe 6 months at least, or something like that, just to see how we like it over this end of the world. But it's kind of a long story, but basically if you're the spouse of an EU citizen, or if you are an EU citizen, you have freedom of movement to move anywhere within the EU. You can live there, work there, study there, whatever. However, you're still subject to your own country's immigration rules. So as a Swede, my wife, and as a partner to a Swede, we can be anywhere within the EU, except if we go to Sweden, there's specific rules for Swedes. And the specific rule there is my wife would have to stay in Sweden, have a house and enough money to support us both. I would have to go back to Australia and apply for a residence card from Australia and wait for them to approve that, which could take 2 years. So that's not going to work. So the other route you can take is to actually move to another EU country, spend some time there, activate your EU freedom of movement, get a residence card, and then move to Sweden and apply for a residence card from within Sweden. So we're thinking of taking that route, which means we have to move somewhere else in the EU first. And we haven't decided on exactly where that's going to be, or we don't know when it'll actually be able to occur just because of the restrictions at the moment. So it's a bit of a complicated process.
Yeah. Yeah.
You got any countries in mind?
Mate, there's a lot of countries that I'd love to go back to or love to go to, but the tough thing is deciding, like, we're going to have to live there for a little while. So that's quite a different prospect. And so I'm trying to think about places that are, not super bureaucratic and the English is good, because that'll just make the whole process a lot easier. So I thought Berlin would be awesome, but I have heard that the government, trying to deal with shit like that when you're immigrating is like a nightmare. It just takes forever to get anything done. So we're looking at like either Ireland or the Netherlands at the moment. So we'll see how we go. But I mean, both awesome places. Been to both of those and loved them both. So, wherever we land, it's hardly a problem. It's just like trying to work out what's going to be the best solution.
I could see you in Ireland sitting in a green field reading a book, or something.
Dude,
yeah.
Ireland. We did a road trip around Ireland, and it's phenomenal. I would love it. The only problem with Ireland is that the housing is unbelievably expensive there. So,
oh really?
Even to rent,
mate. Dublin. I think apart from Zurich, Dublin has the most expensive real estate in Europe.
What?
Crazy.
Yeah,
Dublin.
There's a real housing crisis there. After the GFC, they had a huge problem with housing, and so even in some of the smaller towns outside Dublin, that kind of thing, it's like, it's affordable for us. Like we can afford it. It's not like too dissimilar to what we were paying in Sydney, but the quality of what you get for that money is not what I'm used to. So yeah,
that's crazy. I would not have picked that.
Sydney rent is a little bit more dearer than Melbourne, typically.
Yeah,
Sydney's quite expensive.
Pretty outrageous, and so like I'm not a stranger to that. So it's funny because I have my sister-in-law, for example, lives in Gothenburg, and we were saying, it'd be cool if we could maybe maybe we'll rent something in Gothenburg. It seems to be our kind of pace, our kind of vibe. Lots of hipsters and that kind of stuff there. And she's like, "Oh, but Gothenburg's so expensive," and I just went, "No, it's not. Not for us."
Not for Sydney.
If it's cheaper than Sydney, I'm happy. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
That's it.
So it's pretty funny. Yeah.
Oh,
nice.
I'm sure you'll find your feet wherever you land.
Where is Gothenburg? Is that?
It's kind of, so Sweden's like long and skinny, and so
that's in Sweden.
It's kind of in the middle. On the east coast is Stockholm. On the west coast is Gothenburg, and those are the two biggest cities in Sweden. So yeah, Stockholm's very expensive. Not that much housing available, but it's obviously where most people want to be. Gothenburg's kind of like it's a bit more hipster, I guess. It's like the kind of more of your sort of Fitzroy kind of town, I suppose. It's a bit like that.
Yeah, hipsters.
Yeah, it's pretty cool. It's pretty cool. I like it.
Nice.
Yeah.
Nice.
Crazy.
Now, I've got to ask you before we start to wrap it up, are you an electric guitar or an acoustic guitar man?
I'm an electric guitar man. I have a wide variety of taste in guitar-related music. So I'll play all the way from like blues to classic rock to hard rock to just outright metal. I was a big metal fan, and I bought a guitar just so I can have it in lower tunings, just so I can deal with that instead of having to change tuning all the time. So I've got 4 or 5 guitars, electric guitars now, but I brought one with me from an Australian maker called Ormsby, and it's a headless guitar. It's chambered, so it's a little bit lighter, and I can take the neck off. So I did that and stuck it in my suitcase and brought that with me so I can still play while I'm overseas.
I did see you post that. It doesn't have the, how do you tune it?
At the bottom.
At the bottom.
So there's, at the bridge, you've got little tuning keys here that you can tune.
Crazy.
Yeah, it's pretty cool. It's quite different. It's a real metal machine, that one. So yeah.
Nice. And how long have you been playing guitar for?
Well, so here's the thing. I wish I hadn't given it up, but I started when I was a teenager, and I played like really poorly for like, I don't know, 2 years or something like that. Like just didn't really actually practice that much, and didn't really learn any theory, and just kind of bummed around with it. And like, it was enjoyable, but I didn't really do too much with it. And then I just gave it up for ages, and randomly picked it up again a couple of years ago, and just loved it. And I still probably don't practice as much as I should, or learn the theory as much as I should. You know, some people super obsessed with it and that's all they do, but you know, as you guys know, I kind of dabble in a lot of different things, and so you know, I'm really good with the fitness stuff, and then everything else I'm kind of like, yeah, I'm all right at it, but I'm nothing special, but I just enjoy dabbling in a lot of different things, and it's a lot of fun.
I think
You take me as you just enjoy the process of immersing yourself for a little bit and jumping in and rolling in the mud. I can't wait to see Luke Tulloch _ Carpentry on Instagram.
Yeah, mate, like, no, that's it. Like, I'm going to do that. I think about it so much. And I tell you why. It's because I'm not great with my hands with anything. I'm not handy, and I really want to be. So
Yeah.
I think that would be nice to just have something where you got a project that you just focused on, and there's like, I don't know.
Just like a cabinet making course or something, like a short course on building a coffee table or
absolutely. That's what
crazy.
I want to do, man. That's what I want to do.
there's definitely,
I
I don't know, as a male, there's something about just like wanting to build something that fascinates me. Like I watched Jamie's dad, who's a builder. Like the room I'm sitting in, he built this, and I'm just standing on the gym floor watching him build this room, and I was like,
Yeah.
how is he doing that? Like he's been doing it for 40 years or whatever, but it just fascinates me that that's a skill set that's taken years to develop, but it's just like he built a room. And I was like,
that's
totally.
So cool. And yeah, mate, I feel the exact same thing. I feel that need to, and do you know what? I got this into my head because I have an unusual foot shape. They're like loaves of bread. They're just Islander feet. You know what I mean?
Hobbit feet.
And those shoes fucking fit me. And so I was like, what if I just made them? What if I just made my own shoes? So I had this big idea in my head to like learn leatherworking so I can make myself some boots and all this sort of thing. But it's like a 3-year turnaround to get a pair of shoes. So,
do it. It's worth it.
Hey,
Imagine standing in your own shoes. Imagine walking around.
That's the thing.
It's
crazy.
the good old teach a man to fish and he'll eat forever.
Well,
If you teach him
exactly
to make your own shoes, you'll have a pair forever.
Yeah, that was the idea. So I don't know if I'll follow through on that one, but it definitely crossed my mind more than once.
Nice.
Crazy.
Yeah, well, definitely thanks for the chat today, man. That was
it was good.
I'm sure we could always keep going with it, but how long? We've been going for
about
well
an
over
hour.
an hour.
It's about an hour and 10, I think. So
perfect. We usually try and cap them at an hour just because. But yeah, that was fascinating, man. And you're definitely someone that we obviously look up to here at Strength Culture, and we're interested to see where you go in the industry, and even with carpentry now and boot making.
Arts and crafts. Tulloch Arts and Crafts.
Yeah.
It's where can people find you and learn from you and devour your content on all things?
Yeah, look out for the workshop outside Gothenburg where you can come and learn how to make a chair. LukeTulloch.com is just where everything is. And probably the best thing to do is to enter your name and get on the email list, because I'm more about the email list these days because I can kind of get my ideas out there a bit better than on social media posts, for example. But that's pretty much it. LukeTulloch.com is everything.
Easy.
Awesome. Thanks for your time, Luke.
Thanks for the chat, boys. Always good.
Appreciate it.
Always.